Hi, everyone, and welcome to our special webinar, our last webinar of the year. We'll give folks some time to hop on, and then we will get started. In the meantime, please feel free to introduce yourself and where you're from in the chat. All right, going to give it about one more minute and then we will get started. Welcome again, everyone who is joining. Please feel free to introduce yourself, your name, where you're from, institution in the chat, please. Okay, I think we are nearing max capacity here. And I know we have a lot to cover today. Very excited to hear from all of our panelists. So I'm going to get started. Again, please feel free to continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. So today's presentation is part of the CURC webinar series entitled Findings from the 2024 Survey of Indoor Waste and Diversion Practices with Bush Systems. My name is Carly Thibodeau. I am the Director of Sustainability at Endicott College. We are located in Beverly, Massachusetts, and I'm a member of the webinar committee of CURC. I'm going to be your moderator today, and I also want to give a shout out and thank you so much to Lindsay Hutchison, who is also a CURC board member, providing support on the back end today. And of course, thank all of you for joining us. So if this is your first webinar and you are not familiar with CURC, we represent over 1,000 sustainability champions in higher education, from custodial, grounds, recycling supervisors to student leaders, sustainability coordinators and managers, all of these people. If you are one of those people, then you are in the right place. So we support you, CURC supports you, our fellow waste reduction and diversion champions at colleges and universities across North America, in order to advance sustainable materials management in higher ed and really foster the exchange of best practices to achieve zero waste and build a circular economy. And so today's program is part of our free CURC webinar series, again, really designed to highlight innovative campus programs, provide trends, perspectives on a variety of operational and educational topics. And today is the last webinar in our 2024 series. We'll be starting up again in 2025, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But just before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. If you have any problems with your audio or video during the webinar, you can visit Zoom Support Center at support.zoom.us. And also, just to avoid background noise, we have placed everyone but our panelists' lines on mute. So please, at any time, feel free to submit questions using the Q&A function. I'm really going to focus on having questions go to the Q&A function instead of the chat box. So make sure you're submitting questions there. Encourage you to use the chat for general comments, chat with other attendees, things like that. But questions, try to put them in the Q&A. And we're going to get to as many of these as we can during the discussion portion after all of the presentations, both live, and then our panelists will also try to respond to some in writing as well. Also, if anyone's wondering, copies of today's presentation and slides will be available to download, and the recording as well will be available to stream on our CURC website. And I also am going to do a quick shameless plug as well to our Recycle listserv. Really great resource that covers all sorts of topics related to recycling and waste reduction at colleges and university campuses, other kind of topics of interest for those responsible for planning and implementing these programs. This is free. You can subscribe for free. It's open to anyone. So please feel free to subscribe using the link. And I think Lindsay is probably also going to drop the link in the chat as well. And so again, just to do it, you just visit the link. You'll see a button that reads Ask to Join Group. Once you do this, you will be able to both post and respond to messages and receive those emails. All right. So before we get into the meat of today, I want to introduce Michelle Dunn and Kirsten Mayer with Bush Systems. They are our organization sponsor for today, also the organization who hosted the survey, compiled all the data, did a lot of really awesome hard work on this. And so they're going to talk a little bit about all of the amazing services that Bush offers. So Michelle and Kristen, floor is yours.
Perfect. Thanks, Carly. And again, Bush Systems is very proud to be a sponsor of today's webinar. For those of you who don't know who we are a leading manufacturer of waste and recycling containers. So we are celebrating our 40th anniversary next year. I'm Michelle Dunn, and this is my colleague, Kirsten. She's a sustainability and diversion specialist or advisor here at Bush Systems as well. And I've been had the privilege of working for Bush Systems for the last 16 years. I specialize in working with solely on education and their green initiatives along with healthcare. So we manufacture our products with everything from recycled lumber to recycled plastic, melamine, stainless steel, along with metal as well. Everything that we manufacture is made out of recycled content, and we do specialize in really focusing in on topics that are of everyone's discussion these days of restrictive openings, colors, signage, customization, especially with schools. It's always a popular one as well. Kirsten's going to talk about where we are, where we're headed as a company in terms of what we've done from a sustainability standpoint. I think that's the biggest difference I've seen in the last 15 years from where we're headed as a company and keeping the customer, but also the environment in mind when we're designing our products.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. So here at Bush, we are a B Corp certified organization, and we're really proud to be one of those. B Corp essentially is better corporation. It's using business as a force for good. So we're recognized as having one of the highest verified standards of environmental, social, and stakeholder responsibility, accountability, and transparency. We have a number of sustainability initiatives that we've been rolling out over the past few years here at Bush, including the use of carbon graphs. So we've been partnering with an organization to help us track the life cycle assessment of all of our products so that we can provide a carbon footprint for every single bin that we sell. So we're really proud of that new initiative, which has just come out this year. In addition to those kinds of partnerships, we partner with social enterprises as well, like Plastic Bank. So with that organization and that nonprofit, we are working with them to pull plastic out of the ocean and alleviate poverty in vulnerable areas. So we have a lot of partnerships going on, a lot of research being done, obviously, with this survey, and we're really proud to be a part of this survey and the work that CURC is doing.
Great. Thanks, Carly. We look forward to the webinar.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle and Kirsten. So now to the topic at hand. Going to reshare quickly. Oops. Okay. So welcome again, everyone. So today really going to be a very practical, insightful webinar, again, sharing the results from the 2024 survey. So, over the last decade, we've seen a lot of campuses have really taken steps to improve their front of house collection programs, way to increase diversion, reduce contamination. And in spring of 2024, CURC partnered with the Zero Waste Campus Council, AASHE, and a few other organizations to really survey and assess this. College and university staff mainly to really understand adoption trends with practices like bin standardization, centralized collection from offices and classrooms, food waste collections from academic and administrative locations. So really with this webinar, we're going to review some of the findings. There are so many awesome things, so we don't have time to get into everything, but definitely encourage you to check out the full results of the report afterwards. But we are going to kind of talk about a lot of the observations, the impacts of these practices, and lessons learned for implementing them. We are also going to have a staff member from Stanford University, and they're going to talk about essentially how they were able to communicate these changes and how implementing that went at Stanford, focused on centralized collections, thinking about staff and faculty attitudes and messaging to gain their support. We have several presenters with us today. That's why you see so many of us here as the panelists. So tag teaming the survey results are Alec Cooley, Senior Advisor at Bush Systems, Liana Hauser, Sustainability Zero Waste Manager at Hopkins University, and Laura Gonzalez Espina, Waste and Sustainability Analyst at Sacramento State. We also have Angela Vincent, who is the Zero Waste Communications and Engagement Manager at Stanford, who again is going to be sharing lessons learned from Stanford's efforts to implement standardized collections, how to communicate this change to stakeholders. So with that, I would like to welcome our first presenters, Alec, Laura, and Liana, to start telling us about all the awesome things from the survey.
Great. Thank you, Carly. I'm going to go ahead and start off, and my role is I'm just going to sort of set up and give some background about the project itself, and then I'll hand it over to Liana and Laura in a moment. But to start off, just want to thank CURC and for the opportunity to participate in the project itself and also with this webinar. As Carly said, there's a lot of great information here that with our hope is can help all of you on your respective campuses to implement some of these best practices and improve them over time. So I'm just going to quickly race through some setup slides. As Carly mentioned, this was done as a project, as a partnership between Bush Systems, CURC, Zero Waste Campus Council, AASHE, the National Wildlife Federation, and the Campus Race Zero Waste. What we did is back in the spring, we did a survey of roughly 15 to 20 questions that was done on SurveyMonkey that was sent out to campus recycling, sustainability managers, facility managers across the US and Canada. And those results we've been synthesizing, and we've just published the results. And I will go a little bit more into how you can find these results when we get to the end of the presentation. So as I mentioned, the primary focus of the survey and the project was looking at academic and administrative locations indoors. We wanted to know specifically uniform bin standards is an area we were looking at, as well as centralized collection arrangements from desk side and classrooms. There were three basic types of questions we were asking. To what extent have these practices, and some other ones that are also included in the report, to what extent are campuses actually adopting these? And for those who have already, what kind of impact are you seeing? And then probably most importantly, we also asked folks for some of their lessons learned on how do you actually get them implemented? Because we know it's not just a simple, you wish it and it happens. At the end of the day, really the objective of this project is trying to get some of that the actual information out there that you can take to your respective leadership and show that it's not just us. This is something that's really becoming mainstream, and there's evidence showing that it can have an impact. We're not going to go in depth into actually defining or talking about how to set up these programs, but just as a quick primer of the two main areas we looked at with bin standards, we're talking about things like having a uniform bin design, taking signage that's consistent at all locations, using clear, consistent color distinction to identify the different waste streams, and also as well as how you place bins. And all these are steps that have been proven to help improve aesthetics, obviously, but also they help to improve performance, actually improving recovery and minimizing contamination, and just rationalizing, right sizing where you're placing bins throughout indoor public space areas. And then centralized collections, again, there's a lot more we could go in depth into this, but the basic idea of what we were looking at was specific to office desk side situations, as well as classrooms and the different ways those models happen. And the underlying principle in both cases is how do we step back from sort of that ubiquity of just, I call it a sort of concierge level of service that makes waste disposal very convenient, that can create these differential artificial barriers that can actually help disincentivize recycling and diversion. We were able to encourage or bring in 170 schools overall participated. You can see distributed across the U.S. and Canada, but with an emphasis more on the East Coast primarily. And we had we encouraged all types of schools to participate. We've put special effort into recruiting specifically large U.S. Four-year schools of over 10,000 FTE. And for the reason of doing that is that we knew out of the 4,000 plus colleges and universities, we were not going to be able to get a large sample. But we did want to have at least be able to talk about a subset where we knew we could bring in a sizable percentage, so that the results actually had some meaning, and we could, if not be statistically relevant, at least be able to be, give a window into what's happening with at least this subset. So as we go through these results, just keep in mind that when we talk about sort of the adoption trends of what percentage of schools have done X, Y, Z, that's what we're looking at. This smaller subset of the 93 schools is what we're referring to. When we talk more about sort of the lessons learned, have you actually seen impact? We're drawing from the broader sample of schools and the feedback that we were getting from them. I won't go through all these, but just again, to give you a sense of who was participating, we had a diverse range of schools, large, small, well-known, recognized schools, as well as some community colleges and others that you may not have. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Leanna, who will start talking about some of our initial findings regarding bin standards.
Thanks, Alec. Okay, so we're going to jump into the survey questions and results. The first category of best practices that we surveyed were waste bin standards. So you'll see on the left each of the questions and the responses from the schools. So when we asked about separate colors for each waste stream, about 76% of the schools responded that they do have this practice or this standard in place. As far as uniform labels and signage, 72% of schools do have this standard. Designated bin model or style, like uniform, across their institution, we have 66% of the schools that are responding that they do have this standard. And then in terms of criteria for placement, so are the bins located in the same areas? Is there a standard for where they are located or what order they're located in? Only about 37% of the schools have that as a standard. And then only 17% of the schools have no formal standards whatsoever. So what we are seeing is that there's a strong majority of schools that have designated bin standards for each of the three most common examples, which are color, uniform, signage, and models, with 54% of the schools indicating that they have all three. So there are different degrees of institutionalizing these standards. Some have formalized policies that are adopted across the institution, while others have less formal adoptions or are still phasing in over time as funding and other circumstances allow. The big takeaway here is that whether they're fully implemented or not, the high percentage of adoption for the first three standards shows a growing awareness and consensus that there is a value that their consensus of the value that standards have to improve diversion. Next slide. Okay, so in this question, schools were asked what colors are used to identify the respective collection streams they have in place. As you can see, there's a strong majority for using blue for recycling and green for compost or food waste or organics, however you call it. This is a growing trend. Historically, though, green was often used for recycling just as much as blue, and brown was used just as much for compost as green was. But there is definitely a movement towards blue for recycling and green for compost. Additional factors that might lead to an increased adoption of these specific color standards are that California has legislated that recycling bins must be blue. And as you've seen with a lot of sustainability policies and practices California has adopted, they tend to spread across the country, at least in our institutions, maybe not always in policies, but that may be one factor for increased adoption, as well as blue and green tend to be standard colors for manufacturers like Bush Systems. So it makes it easier, maybe faster, and maybe even cheaper to purchase blue and green as opposed to a specialty color that, is not one of these two. Next slide. Some of the key takeaways for the bin standardization category is that you will likely get pushback against these efforts to prioritize aesthetics over best practices. We know that a lot of architects and planners, etc., want to go with their whatever they feel is most aesthetically appropriate, but through these surveys, we can tell that there is a consensus across the institutions. Be sure you test sample bins for the signage, the models, the colors, etc. Before committing to a specific model, and definitely get feedback from your collection staff. They're the ones that are engaging with it all day, and if it doesn't work for them, it is probably not gonna. It's gonna lead to problems down the road, and we respect their experiences. You definitely want to get your capital projects team or design and construction team, however you refer to them, and other stakeholders to sign off on the standards. If they're not approving them, adopting them, if they're not bought in, then they're likely not going to include them in their future projects, and then your standardization isn't really standard anymore. And always make sure they have the budget for the purchases. And then definitely walk every space to inventory existing bins and then reevaluate, optimal placement, and have a protocol. Try to get it formalized and enforce that standard over time. So we're switching a little focus to the next set of questions, which is centralized collection systems and bin locations, specifically in classrooms. So as you can see from this slide, 39% of schools either don't have trash or recycling bins inside the classrooms or are transitioning to this arrangement where they are removing them. We don't really have historic data, but an anecdotal impression is that this is a growing trend. Many, if not most, however, of the schools that were responded have some exceptions for special locations that do require waste bins inside like a space like labs or larger lecture halls. But 25% of schools only provide trash, which is way down from 15 or 20 years ago, but still represents a surprisingly high example of that kind of legacy arrangement that Alec referred to, that really upholds a structural barrier, and I would say a social sort of, a perception barrier to improve diversion by not offering recycling and compost alongside as an equal option for trash. So let's look at the impact, which is really important here on the removal, bin removal on diversion and contamination. We asked if removing the bins from classrooms resulted in any direct impacts. 74% of schools reported some or significant improvements to diversion, and 64% reported improvement in reducing contamination. The caveat here is that many, if not most in most of the cases, the respondents don't have actual data. The graphs really reflect anecdotal impressions of staff that completed the survey. And we would say that if you plan to and have time to build waste audits into your program before you implement any changes, and then you can do before and after. It would be very helpful for future information for all of us on these calls, so that we can have some actual data that would be really helpful with our partners and decision makers. But essentially, the interpretation here is that what we're seeing is that removing bins from classrooms at least somewhat improves diversion rate and reduces contamination. We assume that in many cases, schools are seeing significant improvement to diversion because they previously only had trash in the classrooms, while no change or somewhat improved may reflect a situation where both trash and recycling bins were previously in the classrooms. Next slide. So I'm sure many of you have heard this concern from your facilities and custodial partners about increased litter if we remove bins. And of course, we always want to respect the experiences of those custodial staff and teams and consider the unintended consequences. But what we're seeing here with these results is that the concern may be more of just that, a concern, than actual consequence. The graph on the left shows responses when asked if removing bins had an effect on litter left in the classrooms, and responses suggest the opposite is actually true. While 8% did say removing bins resulted in worse litter, 32% said it led to less litter, and 61% said there was either no change or mixed results. This is not to say that there are never issues of litter as a result of removing the bins, but with an effective education campaign and sort of changing people's expectations about their responsibility, it can result in no change or an actual improvement. So that is really important when, again, reaching out and working with our custodial teams to implement these changes. And then lastly, really great response or result is that in terms of labor savings, this is the most obvious and could potentially be the most meaningful impact for your argument for centralized waste stations and removing from classrooms, is that 90% of the schools said removing bins freed up custodial time to focus on other cleaning tasks or improving overall operational efficiency and reducing spills on the bins or the floors where they around the bins. So that is that's my portion of the presentation. I'm going to hand it off to Laura to talk more about office spaces.
Great, thank you, Liana. So we're gonna go into desk side waste baskets and the practices we've seen. So this first chart just have a basic question on the left. Do schools provide personal waste baskets to the desk? And we can see that most of the schools on the survey still provide those bins. When in the left, we are asking, do you provide only trash, or you are providing trash and recycling? And we can see that they do pair trash and recycling in most cases. Next slide. We can, in here, it's very important to know that while service is provided, still in some cases, there is on some locations that some campuses already stopped using that. So it means we still provide the bins, but the custodial teams are not servicing those bins in certain locations across campus. We have seen a lot of those changes, and we will hear more from Angela from Stanford how they're testing to see what are the different changes on that later on today. So we're gonna go to the next slide. So in this part of the survey, we try to see if there's any impact on custodial services and like the change on diversion and contamination. I have experienced that pushback about custodian when we are trying to implement something like that, because the first thing is taking their jobs away, but also people think that it's going to be worse. But we can see that the diversion rate hasn't like a lot of mixed results from the survey. Some people have seen improvement, some people have seen no change, but it's still 45% have seen that it's actually getting better after implementation. And then the change on the contamination rate on the right shows that 48, almost 50% supporting that we have seen some improvement. So providing those and removing these services and putting the people to be responsible for their waste actually has shown improvement on diversion rate and contamination rates. Because if you think about it, you are not just throwing something under your desk, but you are taking your bin out to a centralized location and actually thinking what is going into which bin. Next slide. So another great fact about these entire surveys was to really understand if there's any savings and direct savings of any type on waste management by providing this type of bins across campuses. And we can see that labor savings, like it was mentioned in the past, is going to be like significant. We have about 50% of the result that I'm seeing is an improvement, but 36 is like a very significant improvement. So if we like add that up, we can really say that the savings in labor is going to be very impactful. But to see actual direct cost savings is going to go through the liners. So we're going to see the savings come from the less use of liners across campus in different offices. If you think about it, you have a campus of about 4,000 employees. If you have 30 students like me, 30,000 students, you are stopping using, if you have both recycling and about 8,000 liners a day. So that's the direct cost savings you're going to see more and more through the implementation. Next slide. This is like my favorite slide from the entire survey. And it's because no matter what you do, you're always going to get pushback. And this is some of the best responses of what was the important takeaway about this. And is we can see the biggest is communication and strategy, and how having a good communication with your campus actually going to be very important to implement this program. And having leadership support follows right behind that. If you don't have your leadership supporting and being part of the program, it will usually tends to doesn't go as well as you expected. Having your support under your custodian. So that's another 68%. We know custodians all gonna feel like they are not part of it, but empowering them and making them understand why we're doing it and how they will have more time to focus in some areas of their job that usually they don't have enough time at the end of the day or go on overtime to complete their task, really can bring their support in. Stakeholder support is up there with 56%. That's important. You need to make sure, campus are complex. We have many cities, having everybody involved, everybody have strategies, communications, and understand what they're doing, and their support really gonna push for a smooth implementation. Having a plan to monitor after implementation. Just don't roll it out and leave it alone, but really try to follow up and see what's going on and make changes on the go. And it's as close as a pilot case. Never start all across campus. Pick your building, pick your people that is your yes people. They're gonna support you and gonna do the best, and use that as an example to roll out the rest of the program. Strategy and address to complaints. Like I say, no matter what you do, you're always gonna have complaints. So be ready, be that person that you want them to call and explain to them what they're doing and empower them instead of just throwing the complaint away or just complain because they are complaining. Just trying to change the language to make sure the message gets better and we get more people to support the program. And staff ambassadors, our student ambassadors are another great way to lead these strategies. So I'm gonna finish today with just kind of summarizing everything we covered with the results. I know we went really quick, but we have the report that covers more, and we will be answering questions. Do the pilots, make sure you test it before you roll it, be ready to respond to issues, have a communication plan. Is critical, is the best strategy you can get. Be prepared to negotiate and compromise. We always know we need to be flexible. If we work in this field, we need to make sure we're ready to change and think quickly and adapt to get the goals we wanted to. And again, instead of just rolling it out and don't having custodial, support them, empower them, get them to be your allies, and that will help too. And always monitor the implementation, make sure it's going well, change things when they're not, get support, and be flexible. I'm gonna pass it back to Alex for the next part.
Great. Thanks, Laura. I do want to reemphasize one point, one of these last points on this slide that Laura made about the supporting custodians. This is one thing we saw a lot of written comments from different schools, and I actually experienced this when I was at a university myself, that you can put this in place and you can tell people this is our new policy that custodians are no longer going to serve the desk side, but you will see in a lot of cases there'll be individual relationships that custodians have had with professors going back in some cases for decades. And there can oftentimes be a pressure, implicit or not, to, well, can you just get it anyway? So there were many schools that kept citing that. So that is something that's not automatically intuitive, but I think is worth noting. So let me just to wrap up, point out the report is now available online. We have a lot more inside the report than what we covered here, including adoption rates for mini bin systems for desk side, the percentage of schools that were reporting single versus multi-stream, as well as food waste collections from academic areas. So there's a lot of great information in here. One of the other things we invited schools to share if they had actual bin standard guidelines in place. We asked them to share links to those. So the report also will pass you through so you can see examples of actual schools standard guidelines in probably a dozen cases, and then also other resources that schools provided from their experience with centralized collection. So you can find that on the CURC, or you can find the report is available on our website. And also I'll give a shout out to some of you who've been around for a while may remember that CURC has done several surveys in past years looking at other types of questions also related to waste. And you can find those archived on CURC's website at the QR code shown on your screen. Laura, do you want to just take just 60 seconds and tell people about the meetup coming up next week?
Yes, so I represent the Zero Waste Campus Council. If you're not familiar with that, we meet at the end of the month on the last Tuesday, but we are moving the November 1 to November 19 because we understand people might be out of the office the following week because of Thanksgiving. We have casual conversations and networking towards zero waste and sustainability strategies. This month, we will be diving into breakout groups and conversation about how we actually implemented some of these programs, some of the lessons learned, and continue the conversation after the webinar today. So if you want to sign up, please use the QR code to sign up or email me directly. I'll be happy to send the invite to everyone.
Great. Thank you. And with that, we'll go ahead and we'll wrap up. We'll answer as many questions as we can at the very end, but encourage folks to reach out directly if you have questions that we're not able to get to here. But with that, I'll hand it back to you, Carly.
Excellent. Thank you so much to all of you. So many things to digest and think about as we each approach our individual strategies, our institution. So thank you so much. Definitely encourage folks after this to take some time to dive into the full report because there's so many things that we didn't have time to touch on. But now I'm going to turn it over to Angela Vincent from Stanford. Again, kind of talk about their experiences with implementing centralized collection. So take it away, Angela. And again, thank you to Alec, Liana, and Laura.
Awesome. Thank you, Carly. Really excited to be here with you all. So in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to share a little bit about Stanford's story shifting to a centralized collection system and hone in on the lessons that we learn in communications, change management, and behavior. So it was mentioned that California has a law that's requiring everyone to divert food waste and other organic material from the landfill. And so we were able to leverage this law to update our interior collection system and create a new standard. So we heard a lot about the color coding. We color coded our bins, our liners, which is really helpful for the custodians, and also our dumpsters. We made sure that there was no landfill bins standing alone, that they were always paired with a recycling bin and a composting bin in areas with food and strategically located depending on the flow of traffic in a building. That they were labeled, branded, compliant with the law, but really ensuring that everyone has access to recycling and composting to encourage proper waste sorting. And so we implemented these shared waste stations in almost 300 buildings. 86% of our campus is on what we refer to as the zero waste building system, which is where individuals are responsible for sorting any desk side waste at the shared stations. 11% opted out of this program, so we do have some buildings with custodians continuing to service desk side bins, which I'll get into a little bit more. And last year, we saw our highest diversion rate ever at 69% for 2023, due in part to these updates to our interior waste system. So we updated and reorganized over 9,000 bins, 25,000 labels. We did over 50 presentations to stakeholders and directly trained over 2,500 students, staff, and faculty. So I'm going to share a little bit about our change management process. So we heard a little bit about the importance of pilots. So we did a pilot phase where we tested shifting to this new system on a few buildings, and we saw great results in diversion. And so we were able to move on to what we refer to as an early adopter phase. And so we were able to get actually 150 early adopters, which is almost nearly half of our buildings, to volunteer and say, yes, I want to change to this new system. And that was really because of the relationships that our team has been able to build over the years. We didn't have a top-down policy approach at the beginning. So that's why we started with this early adopter phase to try and build momentum for this program and get buy-in across campus. Then we were able to move to an opt-out phase. So we changed, instead of people opting in, we said, okay, this is the standard that we're rolling across campus. And if for some reason, you have concerns about implementing this, then you must opt out. I will say that we initially were looking to take away everyone's desk side bin, but what we realized is we needed to be a little bit flexible and give people the option. And so we became bin neutral, so to speak. And so some people wanted to keep their desk side bin, but they knew that they were responsible for servicing it, while others said, nope, I don't need the bin, take it away. So now we're in this phase of inspections and data analysis. And so we have an inspector who's going into the buildings to ensure the infrastructure is still set up properly, to monitor for contamination. And now we're able to rank buildings by diversion, so we can see who those low performers are and dive in a little deeper and see what's going on. And then potentially test some interventions related to behavior change communications to try and reduce waste and increase diversion, and with the intention of going back to those handful of buildings that have opted out to move them to the campus standard. So a little bit high level about our communication strategy and some of the tactics that we used. So this is after you've convinced your leadership to update your waste system. And working with building managers. So we started off with a simple initial email, and then we utilized a communications checklist. This was a Google form asking building managers, is there space in your building to store these bins? Is there any access issues? How concerned are you with people's reactions to these changes? That was really helpful to gather more data from the building managers about the culture of the building. We held a lot of one-on-one meetings to talk about the what, the why, and the how of these changes. And then we held webinars with groups of building managers to be a bit more efficient in our communications. And then with the building occupants, we started out with a survey saying, these are the changes that we're thinking of making in your building. How do you feel about them? That was really key to help us give us a sense of the attitudes and the reactions to these changes. And then the day of implementation of updating these waste bins, we left little table tents on each person's desk saying, now is the time to take your desk side waste to the centralized collection station. We put up flyers in the buildings, we held trainings, and then now we're starting to do post surveys, so surveys after the changes have been implemented to assess people's attitudes over time. We also used a map to help track our progress. This was a multi-year initiative, and this was helped us communicate to leadership, here are the buildings that have opted in, here are those that have opted out, and then here's the remaining buildings, just to demonstrate our progress. So now I'm going to dive into a little bit about framing. So we were really intentional about moving away from using phrases like we're taking away desk side collection or we're removing the custodial service, and instead emphasize phrases like we're moving towards X, Y, and Z. We're transitioning to, and we use the language of individuals are now responsible for sorting desk side waste, and custodians are now responsible for servicing those shared waste stations in lieu of desk side bins. So really intentional, really subtle changes in the word choices, but we found it to be helpful in reducing some of that friction. Some other word choices that we realized is that using the word centralized was doing us a bit of a disservice, because some people tended to think that meant there's only one set of bins in a building or one set of bins on the floor, and that's just not the case. So we actually changed to using the term shared waste stations to help communicate that there's going to be bins throughout your building based on the traffic, etc. We wanted to make sure we were inclusive in the language that we were using. And then we branded our program. So we worked with an organization to help brand. You see our cute little owl here that we've been utilizing, enhancing that recognition of the program. And then making sure that we were doing a good job of intercepting any complaints so that the building managers didn't have to deal with those. They weren't getting elevated. So having contact information was really key to make sure that we're able to respond to those concerns that people have. Now, I want to highlight some of the behavior change principles that we utilize to support this change management effort. So I touched on this, is making the undesired behavior more difficult. So that shift to the opt-out was really effective to make it just that more difficult for people to say, no, 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 I don't want to do this in my building. Highlighting the social approval. So I mentioned the surveys. We were able to capture quotes from building managers and building occupants and use those quotes and testimonials in our outreach to highlight hey, this is what your colleagues are saying. They feel positively about it. Using normative messaging, again, very subtle, but in our communication saying, hey, a growing number of buildings are on this new system. Don't you want to join them and sign up? And then habit stacking and prompts. So when we communicated with people, we were trying to emphasize that we're not asking you to do something completely different out of the norm. While you're walking to the copy room, bring that piece of paper that needs to go into the recycling bin. While you're headed to fill up your water bottle, bring that banana peel and put it in the compost bin. And then with the prompts, I mentioned the table tents, leaving them on people's desk as that reminder to sort their desk side waste at the stations. Now, I mentioned the survey. So we really approached this with a glass half full approach. And what I mean by that is we asked people about all of the changes that we were making, and we got high approval ratings for, adding compost bins to the restrooms. But what was split was this shift to the centralized waste stations and the responsibility of people sorting their waste at those stations instead of having custodians do it. But what we found is that we still had a majority of folks who were either supportive or neutral. So in this day and age, it's really hard to get consensus, right? And so we went with that. We have a majority of people, so we're going to move forward. And actually what we're seeing is that in our post surveys, we're seeing more people move from disapproval to that neutral category. So not necessarily, jumping up and down and moving to that support, but moving to neutral, which we definitely see as a win. So folks touched on this a little bit. How do we deal with these trickier customers? So doing a lot of one-on-one meetings to explain the why, the what, and the how. That takes a lot of time and effort, but we found it really effective. And things can get lost in email communications, but having those face-to-face interactions was really key. We surveyed trickier buildings earlier in the process. So we said, okay, you're not on the schedule till August. Let's survey you in February. We'll give you the results. We'll meet with the building manager. And if it's below the campus average, then maybe we'll pivot and try a different approach here. consulting with building managers on previous changes. What went wrong and what did they learn from previous changes that we could implement and when we're trying to make this change. And then this was really helpful. We offered a hybrid solution. So instead of just automatically moving to opt out in these buildings who were hesitant, we said, okay, are there spaces in your building where you don't think that there'll be that much pushback? You know, are there certain floors where there's a lot of classrooms, there's a lot of shared waste stations that we can implement this new system, and that maybe just on one floor where there's a lot of offices, a lot of trickier customers that are going to push back, we can continue custodial service there and then circle back to get them up to the standard at a later time. So that hybrid solution was key, and then just goes back to being flexible and working with folks. So here's some of the survey results. The top benefits that people shared about sorting at the waste station was getting up and moving their body and getting their steps in, so to speak. That really rose to the top. But we're finding in the post surveys that there's an increase in people saying that, hey, a top reason for me to sort at the station is to take responsibility for the waste that I produce. And we're really encouraged by that, because our hypothesis is that, you know, if people are sort of faced with the waste that they're producing every day and have to deal with it, that maybe they'll think a little bit differently about some of their purchasing habits, et cetera. And some of the discouraging factors, what people said, hey, this is really inconvenient, you know, for me to sort at the waste station. Time was something that popped up, and then bin location. So getting that location right is key, and that is a lot of working with the building manager and understanding the traffic of the building and the various uses to make sure we have the bins in the right places. What we're realizing is that this infrastructure is really foundational, but this systems change is not enough. There's this whole cultural piece and cultural change that needs to happen if we want to reach our zero waste goal. And so what we're looking at is working with our faculty and our students to help think about what other messaging can really encourage this pro-environmental behavior. What does resonate with folks to get them to sort their waste properly? And then with our students, having them generate ideas on how can we normalize proper waste sorting? How can we destigmatize some of these things? So we're really looking forward to implementing some of these learnings as we continue on. So next steps for us at Stanford, I mentioned we're able to rank buildings by diversion, and that's really helpful to identify our high performers that we can learn from, what's working well, and our low performers. What do we need to do to really move the needle here? Those inspections are key, and then we're really looking forward to testing some different behavioral and communication interventions to see what moves the needle in terms of waste reduction and waste diversion. We're doing another waste characterization study actually right at the moment, to say, okay, we updated our waste system. Everyone has access to recycling and composting. What is still ending up in the landfill, and what do we do next? And that will lead into the next phase of our zero waste action plan to give us a roadmap for achieving our ultimate goal of 90% diversion away from landfill by 2030. Most importantly, I have a ton of resources to share with you. We have our survey questions, the template emails, the trainings, the flyers, pretty much everything we utilize to help with this change. You can access at this QR code. It's our contact form. You can choose the centralized waste collection resources from the drop down, and I'll be happy to provide those to you. I know I went through those slides pretty quickly, but we're going to transition to questions, and I'm always happy to follow up with anyone who's looking to dive in deeper. I'll just leave my slide up here with my email address, and looking forward to connecting with you all. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angela, on taking us through that deep dive in terms of, okay, these ideas are great. How do we actually make them happen? And what does that process look like? Very helpful to me. And I was taking notes as you were talking, so hopefully helpful to others as well. I'm going to take a couple minutes now for questions. So reminder, any questions, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A section now. And we can kind of get started here. Okay. So let's start with as I have all of my slides open here. So first thing, I have seen a lot, and I think Lindsay has answered in the chat, but just want to emphasize as well, all of these slides and this full recording is going to be posted on the CURC website. So just wanted to get that out of the way quickly because I've seen a couple of those come in. In terms of questions, Alec has also been answering some questions in the Q&A, so please feel free to take a look at that if you submitted a question. Some have been answered written, but we are going to start with, in the spirit of responsible diversion, curious how you might approach the adoption of new bins to meet a future standard, creating bins that have no longer a purpose. They are already owned by the college. What is your thought on creating another stream that needs to be diverted, seen as extra work for facilities to figure out? So I think this one, Angela, I know you guys have worked on this, but open to anyone.
I can offer, I guess, my response, a version of that. When you have all these old bins that you're trying to remove off campus, especially if your strategy is doing this as a phased in, you've got capital budgets and buy new bins every year, so you're sort of moving across campus over a long period of time. One strategy is focus on getting rid of the orphans first, sort of the funkier bins, the ones that you have a fewer number of. Remove those from campus, reach out to local K through 12 community colleges that may not have their own budgets to buy bins and may be an upgrade for them. But then as you're phasing in, one approach is to consolidate. Take your old bins that are the better ones, the ones you have more of, and at least start to consolidate those so that within the buildings where you're putting them, at least you're having a consistency, because that's one of the objectives of bin standards, is trying to move away from the funkiness of all these different styles. So if you could consolidate around, at least on a temporary basis, some of the nicer of the old bins and consolidate those to a building, that at least is moving you in that direction as an interim until you actually have the budget to apply your standard uniformly across the entire campus, if that makes sense. So that's one strategy I would offer.
Any thoughts from any of the other presenters before I move on from that one?
Yeah, I mean, I can just share, that's an excellent, prioritization, Alec. We were able to donate a lot of bins to local city schools. A lot of our schools in the area don't have robust recycling programs or nothing at all. And so they were incredibly grateful to get bins that were no longer, part of our standard. And so that was one way to repurpose them, not necessarily on campus, but to connect with the community and offer that resource.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Liana and Alec. Next question. What is your experience getting those schools certified with third-party standards such as True Zero Waste or others? I'll open this one up to anyone as well.
I don't have anything to offer myself. Angela, go ahead.
No, we haven't pursued the true certification, so nothing to add beyond that.
Okay, sounds like that one is a question that has stumped even our expert panelists. So,
It's a
great
great one to
question.
reach out to True though directly, because they have thoughts and they're usually pretty helpful to interact and answer questions.
I also know BU has done some work certifying a new building with True. So there are definitely folks at BU I can recommend to reach out to. So, feel free to reach out to me or to CURC following this, and I'm sure we can get you guys some more resources there. Awesome. Okay. What liabilities should we be aware of when collecting electronic waste?
I can take that one. Just make sure you have a local recycler that takes some of it. Like you have a list of where you can take and where it can be recycled correctly in your area. It changes depending where you are. Refrigerators, anything with antifreeze is like the biggest struggle. Those need to be empty before you can recycle those. So if you don't have the capacity to do that on site, so some recyclers won't even take it. So just be aware of those. All refrigerators and lab equipment that have antifreeze on them.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. Does it looks like that one question was just answered written. Are there any waste operational changes that are so on the cutting edge that they weren't included in the survey? Or to put it another way, if you did the survey again in 5 to 10 years, any predictions for future focus areas?
It's an excellent question. And that's something we've been thinking about is what would we do going forward? I don't know that there are any new different operational practices that are the obvious aha. We really need to understand these. I think there's from my perspective, there's just getting down to more granular level understanding how these are applied, and even some of the tried and true ones. How do we go back and better understand how they're done more effectively? I know one conversation that's had is this was really kind of a public facing infrastructure in relation to, a lot of this is about how we affect behavior, but there's a whole lot on the back of house side that would be interesting to look at. Custodial patterns. How do we train custodians? How do we, keep them on board and design systems so that just from an operational perspective, that's one area personally I'd like to see. And I would also love to come back and do a survey like this again in 5-10 years to see if we can, really find a trend. Are we seeing it going in an obvious direction?
Awesome. Thank you. I have been so immersed in hearing all of these questions and responses come in. I realize we are at the end of the hour, so I'm going to pause questions for now, but we do have all these questions in the Q&A function and in the chat, which are phenomenal. So I believe we're going to try to answer those following the webinar. We'll send out some feedback. But before we all go, I just wanted to share some quick notes, kind of closing thoughts here. So again, as I mentioned, today's webinar wraps up our 2024 webinar series. So things coming up for CURC. We are always looking for webinar topics. So if you are interested in submitting either a topic or being a presenter at one of our CURC webinar series, please feel free to submit a topic proposal at the form here on our website. And also, please, if you are a CURC member, thank you and awesome. If you're not yet a CURC member, please consider joining and join us for our 2025 annual members meeting. This is on January 23rd, really kind of a wrap up of the 2024 year, kind of what we found, what worked well, what didn't, and kind of the different things that we talked about, as well as an overview of where we are going, really trying to get feedback and input from you as members in terms of what do you want to see from CURC. So definitely encourage folks to join that. And I also want to add a note to stay tuned for our very first virtual vendor showcase. This is also going to be in January, really trying to bring together providers of zero waste solutions, help you all kind of identify solutions that will help improve your operations. And then also we'll be kicking off our 2025 webinar series on February 20th. Focusing on alternative framing of waste reduction and diversion. So getting started right away. 2025 sounds like a crazy year when I say it out loud, but it's here. So we're thinking about it. Again, if you want to share your institution's work, please submit a proposal. We are always encouraging folks to reach out to us, and we want to hear from you. We will also have these slides and recording posted up on our CURC website within a few days. So please feel free to visit the website for those resources. And just one last time, want to thank all of our awesome presenters for today, for sharing their knowledge, for sharing the survey results, for sharing kind of successes and challenges with implementation from Stanford. So again, thank you everyone. And thank you, Lindsay, for technical support in the background. Everyone have a wonderful afternoon, and we will see you in January. Okay, awesome. Thank you, everyone, again. we'll be reaching out to share some feedback to presenters as well in a few days. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.